Go ahead and call this meeting to order. Don't know if there's any special protocol. I'll defer to Nate. Is there any special protocol for this particular meeting? But okay.
No, I was shaking my head, but no.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, yes. Well, no, we will. It's Kumbaya comes at the end, Troy. I wanted to welcome everybody for being here in the middle of a work day, in the middle of the week. Super grateful for everybody's time. It shows how committed this board is to the success of this mission. So I am personally deeply gratified to have everybody here today. So thank you very much for taking this time out. I wanted to discuss kind of the idea of what I had in mind as leading this discussion, as moving this discussion forward, is breaking this into three tranches, more or less. It's where we are today, the current state, where we would like to be, the future state, and then finally, how do we get there? And creating a set of action items. And then beyond that, we can look toward the next year and say, what are these action items that rise to the level of prominence that we would really like to make certain we are saying that a year from now we have achieved these demonstrable metrics. But beyond that, I wanted to make certain that this was a free-flowing discussion, that everybody is welcome to participate, including staff is welcome and encouraged to participate, because staff, of course, is the on-the-ground expert every day, day in, day out, with the communication, the finger on the pulse of the public, just in many ways as park commissioners are. So with that, I wanted to go ahead and open up with what we have heard from the public with our survey results that we've come out. And so we've brought Katie down, who can go through the results we've had and kind of start off our discussion from there. So does anybody have any questions before we get started? Okay. All right, Katie, you'd like to go ahead?
So I did give each of you a copy of the survey results. It's not a huge sample size. We had 13 responses to the survey, but that does give us a little bit of insight as to what the public knows about the park board and what y'all do, and what's important to them. So,
How did, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sorry. How do we get this out? Like,
it was shared on Facebook, was really the only means of getting it out. So
Okay.
it was shared a few weeks ago, and then we pushed it out again one more time yesterday, just to make sure a few more people saw it.
okay, sure. I just
Great.
So, just starting from the beginning, I guess, it's good that 11 out of those 13 have at least heard of the park board. So, good start. However, not that many knew that park board owns some of the parks in Wichita. So that could be a way to improve awareness, basically, of just what's going on within the city. A few have attended a park board meeting before, so we know that we're hearing some voices that are willing to speak up and get out there about what they think. Most of the topics that we've discussed this year, people are pretty familiar with. That cyclocross one, we'll need to get some more info out about that in the coming year. But Nassau Park seems like a big one. Golf is a big one. But yeah, at least everything else had been marked a couple of times. Chris was pointing out before the meeting that walking paths being the #1 most important thing to people was really cool. Paths, bicycle paths, river recreation, swimming pools, but you can kind of just see some of those things. And in the other category, we got community events was added as well. So you can kind of just see the breakdown. It seems like everything is at least somewhat important to people. But walking paths is definitely a big one. And then kind of the meat and potatoes of it is going to be those additional open-ended responses at the end. And I think that'll guide some of the discussion today. Not sure if you just want to go through those one by one, make comments, what exactly the plan was with that open-ended question.
Sure. Well, I think that's kind of the end of this survey here. I think, I don't know, how do we want to go about taking notes? Does anybody have any particularly good handwriting that would like to volunteer? Alejo had been suggested before as a great...
I can, but I can't guarantee you're going to read it.
Okay, that's okay. Well,
It's like hieroglyphics.
But that's at least what Troy said, that you had the most readable handwriting. So.
You didn't say mine was?
Listen, it's no.
All right, I'll take notes.
I just wanted to kick it off there and say, like, that was those are the open-ended results of what we have from, admittedly, a small survey, but there's a whole lot of different people on this board. Some people have been on the board for some time. Some of us have been here for much shorter, but let's talk about this current state. What are you hearing in these results? What is it that sticks out to you the most?
I mean, to me, it's the lack of participation. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, 13 people out of 500,000 people in Wichita participated. And I know not everybody's on Facebook, but I mean, I know plenty of people follow the Parks board or the Parks page on Facebook. So I would have just liked to have seen more people participate. But then the other thing is just lack of awareness. Like, I don't think people realize how much the Parks Department does and how much we're responsible for, or how much our staff is responsible for. So that's another thing. And then I don't know. I mean, it's funny seeing some of these comments. It's not funny, but it's just interesting to see what people value. And I mean, I've had conversations with folks in my district about some of the things that they value, and they weren't mentioned on here, but I'd be happy to share some of those things as we move forward. But I just would have imagined we would have seen more engagement.
Yeah, what is our count on these? Just,
I don't know the exact amount, but it's somewhere like 17 to 19,000 roughly on Facebook.
and then is that account, is that spread across our social media? So does that Facebook tie to Instagram, Twitter, what other platforms?
So that's the number just for the Wichita Park and Recreation Facebook page. There is also an Instagram tied to that, but it's a much smaller number, just a few thousand. And then each individual, like sub-page after that, Navier Park, Open Streets, those have a few thousand each as well. And obviously there's gonna be some overlap on those pages, but the main Park and Rec page is about 17,000.
That's a good number. Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, I think that in some respects it's kind of a drag. Like, oh, do you want to fill out a survey? I think a lot of folks, like, unless you really want to fill out a survey, like you got a bone to pick with parks maybe, or you've got a particular issue, like, I don't know, like I'm not all that discouraged by
We've had
13.
more than 13 people show up to a golf meeting.
Well,
You can't tell me that there isn't some people interested.
I concur.
I think on social media, most people like the easy aspect of it, like clicking a link, sharing a post. That's the easy thing to do, to share in the successes of the park department. But definitely anything beyond that with active participation is a little bit more taxing.
You gotta flog people.
Even a 2-minute survey, it's an extra step that many people don't want to go through unless they have something specific that they want to share.
This is just what I was going to point out with the question. Number 6.
Oh, Lucia. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you had your hand raised. I'm sorry, Lucia. What's up?
Okay. I just was kind of curious if the link was only posted like on only the parks page, or maybe moving forward if we can also share it on like the Wichita, like the city of Wichita page, or even like the wichita.gov or sedgwick.gov like websites and things like that, because I completely agree that 13 people responding is not what we want to hear, not what we want to see. I don't feel like the survey was too long or anything like that, and so maybe it's just a matter of reaching people a little bit better, or putting it out there so it's seen enough. Or I don't know if it was like the survey was like pinned at the top of, the web page when they viewed it or something like that. But just a few ideas as far as like maybe reaching more people from moving forward. Just my thoughts.
Concur. Yes, absolutely.
So we've been pretty successful in the past with a lot of our other surveys, sending information out through all of our social media. We've gotten some really, really good responses. And so I don't want you to think we just put it out there and just forgot about it. We put it out there on something that is really strong. Our social media is very strong. If you recall, we put things out on social media and we get 500 people showing up to different events. And that's our only method of sending information out. So, I think a lot of it also has to do with the topic of what's going on. And if you would look at question number 6, the responses are very, very specific to their particular interest. One was about trees, the other one was about splash pads, that splash pads are not fun. I disagree. I have lots of fun at this. I enjoy the splash pads. Yeah, and then the topic about not putting the lights up at pickleball courts. Well, currently there's no lights up with pickleball courts unless you're going to Riverside Tennis Center. So, these 6 responses were very, very targeted to very specific interests. So.
Any other thoughts jump out? Any other thoughts, and maybe not in the responses, about current state, about where we are? Or anything else that speaks to you? I think something that's interesting as far as as even though this is a very small sample, the interesting thing that jumped out is it seems that the priorities, at least lifted up that I'm seeing, they seem to be kind of fixed cost priorities, like walking paths, bike paths, canopy, and playgrounds and whatnot. That's an investment cost of building such a thing and maintaining it, of course, but it's not necessarily like special programs. There seems to be, at least in this very small sample size, an emphasis on infrastructure, perhaps. And river access. There's really very little infrastructure, because I actually went down and I went to the boathouse downtown. I was very grateful to be invited down there. And the infrastructure's in place. I think that folks are interested possibly, and this is some of the discussions that we've had, is access, better access to some of these amenities, perhaps. That's what I'm reading out of it. That again, we have a really great opportunities for a lot of different special programs, like you can see in here. I'm just thumbing through many different, and we're doing a great job of a lot of these programs. I think, though, some of these infrastructure things are rising to the top in a lot of people's minds. A lot of people are still talking to me separately about trees, of course. I think a lot of people get that. So that's another thing. But in any case, I wanted to, I wanted to spend the first probably 45 minutes total, so that leaves about 30 in this segment talking about where we are now in our current state. I wanted to throw out a couple of issues, neither with good or bad associated with them, just things that have come to mind that I hope that we can talk about and address as needed. And this is something that I've discussed first with Tom here recently, was just where do we stand in terms of all of our contracts for that is before the Board of Park Commissioners. If you asked me right now who is responsible for the contract to mow all of our parkland, I don't feel like I could find that answer very clearly without going to you about this particular piece, and that's okay. Like, there's going to be a lot of specific information that rests with you. But when we hear about issues of staffing that are outside of your control and our control, I'm interested in what those contract discussions look like. Because, if we're holding positions open for years on end that we can't fill, what is the solution to that? How is it that we can help alleviate that? Are contractors possibly a solution? So I think maybe in the future at some point, looking at our staffing issues and our contracts that are outstanding now, who is doing all of the functions of this department? I don't know if I have a clear picture of that. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Does this jive with anybody else?
It's definitely come up before, but it does lie with Mr. Houtman as far as what contracts are, obviously, there's a lot of things that we might be able to contract that we don't contract. There's a lot of stuff that we contract that maybe we shouldn't contract, but that's just city function, I get that. So, I mean, this is not a new topic for Troy.
So, we have many contracts, especially in regards to mowing. And I could probably spend 3 hours just going over that portion of it. And another good example is, it's come up a couple times across the board, is our relationship with the Wave down at Nassau Park. And the idea was that we were going to partner with them and create a contract with them that they would provide entertainment and they would be able to sell alcohol to pay for that entertainment. That was the foundation of that agreement. We're always willing to try something, and that sometimes we want to do it ourselves, or sometimes there's a partner that we want to do it with, and this was a situation to see what we can do to enhance NASCAR Park and downtown programming. After we started working on this, it was more like a square peg in a round hole, that the Wave really wasn't able to do the things they wanted to do. It wasn't really set in the vision that we expected it to happen. And so there was not a whole lot of alcohol sales downtown at the park. So I had a conversation with Adam over at the Wave about 2 weeks ago, and we decided that we're not going to move forward with the contract. It was going to be renewed, but we had the possibility of renewing it, but we're not going to do that. And we're not even going to ask for that type of service, because we can go to different vendors and ask them to provide that service with providing alcohol. So if it's an event that we're going to be doing, we'll solicit different vendors and we'll make sure that everybody gets a chance. Maybe it's even an on-call situation. If it's something that, if Mr. Palmer wants to throw a party at NASCAR Park and he wants a certain vendor, he can do that. So, as we learn things, we change things, and whether it's dealing with something like NASCAR Park, or how we deal with golf. That's a really good example. I was just going to say the ice rink is another situation where we've changed contracts and operators. So I try to keep you guys in the loop on most of the stuff. Some of the stuff is so minute, it's to me, it's just operational items. What I look for the board to give is more direction in regards to vision and policy. So our day-to-day stuff, the things that a lot of people ask you guys questions about, I don't think it's in your realm to be able to answer all those. Unless you want to come work for me, or unless I want to work for you, one of those situations. But a lot of times this happens through council as well. Somebody will call a council member and say, how come X Park wasn't mowed? Well, it's an operational item. Council's not going to know. I don't even know. I have to do some research and find out operationally what's happening and then give the answer. So there's two really big things to think about, in my opinion. And I guess since this is a retreat, I get to share a little bit of my thoughts on this, is that there's vision and there is policy. And there's things that I really need you guys' support. I need your guys' thoughts on it. I need to understand the direction and get the representation that you guys represent. And then there's day-to-day operations. Day-to-day operations, I'm just getting stuff done, making things happen. And I think those are two different buckets, as we were talking about buckets earlier. So a lot of these things I think are operational wise. I would be happy to share with you and spend time with you, but there's a lot.
So, Chris, to understand your question, are you wanting to know more like how do we gain knowledge about the types of contracts? Are you wanting us to like is the question for the board to be more involved in the contracting process?
No, that's a good question. I appreciate you asking it. When I say I feel disempowered when I hear that there are many openings in the park department and there's really nothing we can do about it. And when you work in private business, there's, if you have openings that are held open, like how is it that we can close that gap? How is it that when we have needs because when I hear there are openings in our department staff, that's telling me that there's services not being offered. Okay, understand that we can't make everything happen, just by wishing it. However, are there ways that we can streamline some of this through contractors, say? I mean, I'm saying that I feel like I'm not giving you the best if I don't know how I can help close some of those gaps as a member of this board. And it makes me feel that I'm not doing enough. And Tom, do you have a thought?
I brought it up with both Chris and with you, Troy. For me, it's a policy issue that we move away from two-stroke engines to more electrical and more battery-operated outdoor power equipment. That there's no reason why we can't influence our contractors to say, if you want to continue with the contract, you need to switch over time, not tomorrow, not this year, but it's just damaging to the environment, to the ears, to the health and well-being of the people doing the work, and there's no reason why we can't do that. And so that to me is a policy issue and I don't know how to put that into a contract or to influence our contractors in that way.
So I'm going to mention two different things. Let me address yours first. So yes, that's something that is always something that we want to get those policy items, massage them and work with them and get them put into operational aspects right now. If I was to put something like that right now into a contract, I would get nobody to mow our parks. Depending on, and you're right, you could do it in steps, so you can kind of, but right now, our vendors, it's not a priority to them, and
it's a priority to us. It's a priority to me.
Yes, but let me finish.
Okay.
Let me finish. The only way I can make it a higher priority is a way for them to gain from it financially. So, but it's a slow process. So one of the things that we did offer, and in the latest round of contracts, is we are taking out, blowing out grass on the sidewalks, just reducing the blowing, because it really doesn't do anything. It's loud, it's two-stroke engine, it's polluting, pushes the grass either into the gutter or back into the grass, but the next time the wind blows, it just blows it out again, or vice versa. So the looks that I got was like, you can't do that. I said, well, yeah, we can. Let's see what we can do. So I get it, and I understand that there's policies that we want to apply, I should say. But there's a way that I have to do that operationally.
We could also provide incentives. We can say,
Sure.
For these group of contractors we're working with, we'll give you an incentive, we'll give you a subsidy or something like that if you switch over 25% of your two-stroke engines to battery operated over the next year. And next year it's got to be 40% or you don't qualify or something like that. I do want us to be competitive with our contractors, but it's our money that they're using. They're doing a service for us.
But unfortunately, I only have a certain amount of money. And currently, I don't have enough money to cover everything, even without incentives. So,
Troy? Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I understand what Tom's saying, and I hear what he's saying, but I'm gonna resonate with where Troy was going. To get a vendor to do that, we're either gonna have to pay them a substantial amount of more money for them to do that, or if you wanna give them incentives, where do we get that? You just talked about infrastructure and things like that. How do we pay for this stuff? So now we're digging into our pockets to get environmentally friendly mowers. So now we can't.
One second, Lucia.
We can't pay to have a new bridge at Clap Park. So, that's if you can come up with the money that would answer all of his questions. That would be able to give Troy the ability to hire anybody that he needed to hire. It'd give him the ability to select vendors, more green-friendly vendors. It's, at the end of the day, the struggle, I've been on this board for 6 years, almost 7, and every year it's the same thing. We don't have the money, we don't have the money, we don't have the money. Not because anything they're doing. I mean, I think Troy's done a fantastic job in the Parks Foundation and the plates. You know, Brian Fry and those guys came up with the plates for parks. That was huge for us. But we're so far. If you go to like Tulsa and you go to other cities, their park department are fully funded. We're not. I don't know. I would say 50%, 60% funded maybe. I don't know. I mean, I don't feel like we're fully funded by any stretch, but.
There's a lot of different.
Yeah, so anyways, I just wanted to say, I mean, I understand what you're saying, Tom, and I'd love to get there too, but where do we give to get? Right? So if you can, to answer your question, if you can financially come up with a magic tool for Troy, he could fill those spots, right? He wouldn't have to hold open. He could get contractors or not if we didn't need them. It's all, at the end of the day, it is all about the money. I've heard this year after year after year. Funding.
Sure. No, I super appreciate that. Lucia, I want to make sure I'm not holding you with your hand up for too long. What's up?
I would just wanted to chime in and kind of, I completely agree with him. I think that it's a pretty bold ask to ask contractors to make their own investment, to make their equipment battery operated. That's a huge feat on their own, out of their pocket, just to keep us as a contract. Whether, you know, they agree or we agree that, yeah, we should be green or we should not be green or whatever. I mean, that's a pretty big debate from a lot of different people regardless of what side you're on. But to have, you know, that be a requirement for someone to keep their contract with the Parks Department, and I think it's going to be a pretty bold ask, and it's going to be hard to follow through. And I completely agree that it comes down to the money. I mean, I haven't been on for very long, but what we keep hearing is we don't have the money for staff, we don't have the money for this, we don't have the money for that. And so, like you said, if we offer the incentive, there goes more money that we don't really have in the first place to offer. So, I mean, I definitely understand the idea behind it, the motivation behind it, and trying to make improvements and things like that. But I just feel like that's going to be a very slippery slope when we start, you know, kind of forcing our hand in a way where you know, if you want to stay as a part of the parks, you know, contractor, then you have to have X, Y, Z. I think that starts to get a little slippery. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, thank you very much. Alejo, were you going to say something?
Oh, no.
Okay.
You're good.
I was going to say, at some point, the Clean Air Act is going to force you to do it. Because at some point, we're going to get out of attainment. If we continue to grow as a community in the surrounding metropolitan area, because it's right where Wichita growing, it's the suburbs, it's Derby, it's Goddard, right? As that continues to grow, if we move out of attainment for nitrogen or anything else, it's going to force us to do that anyway. So the city then will have to find a way to do that.
Yeah,
So at some point, you know, we fall out of attainment. And, you know, with that way that system works is it begins at the beginning when they start burning the Flint Hills. And that counts in our score. So at some point, we may have to do it anyway because we won't be in compliance with the Clean Air Act, so.
When we have,
Then that'll be forced upon them.
Yes.
From not the park board, not Troy, that'll be forced upon them
Yes.
in everything, and that's not an expense.
And if we
back to
move,
us.
right now it's 75 parts per million, but I mean, you know, if they move down to 72 or 70, then, yeah, then we will be out of attainment, and then we would have to do something, so.
one of the interesting things is for our staff, for when there's ozone action days where we can't operate, we don't operate. But on the private sector, those folks still operate. And it's because they're trying to make a living. Those things are going to be really interesting as time moves on. And Tom, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking we can definitely do this by steps, and we can definitely make offers to say, you know, here's an incentive. Maybe you get a larger contract. Maybe you get more park space if you do have some zero emission equipment. So our contractors, I know they push back, but you know what? Unless we actually start putting some stuff out there, and we could put stuff out there without, there's a choice, and the incentives might be small, but if we don't put them out there, then we'll never get a chance to learn. So I think next year I can work something out.
I'm sure they replace part of their equipment every year anyway.
Mhm.
So we could encourage them to shift to more sustainable.
And I'd be interested in that discussion. I mean, like, certainly balancing, what's realistic with, if we're looking at the long term, I think a lot of my hope would be just as we're having these discussions and of course, as we move in that next module of like where we want to be, I hope that we can take the long view on everything. Like, what is the not only the 1 year view, but what's the 10-year view? Like, what is even the 50-year view in some cases of what kind of park land do we want to leave? What kind of values do we want to instill, in this moment that people can look back 30 years from now and say, man, what were they thinking? Like that's the kind of discussions I hope that we can continue to have. And Troy Troy Palmer brought up something I wanted to say, because you were saying, you brought this up year over year over year, and I completely can relate to that. It's very frustrating. I mean, there's a lot of frustration a lot of times. And so I want to talk about how we can possibly, at least, if not address that, discuss that. Because there was a story in the Eagle here recently talking about the history of the governance of the Board of Park Commissioners and how in the early 90s we transitioned, our governance, and now we stand ostensibly as an advisory board of political appointees, where that, and it's great. There's a lot of good that can be done on this board. However, when it does not have its own independent functions, when it exists merely as a function, it's devolved from the city council, there's certainly a kind of a change in the abilities of the board. And I think that you see a lot of, at least in my perception, since I've been on the board, there's a lot of frustration because there's only so much we can do. Okay, well, let's recognize as well that if we don't like that, if we don't like the way things are, perhaps there can be a discussion of, are there other systems that are possibly better, more responsive to the needs of now? That if we are underfunded consistently, how is it that we can raise this to the level of necessity that's politically unacceptable? And you do that. There are other ways to do that say, like, and this is not a recommendation, I'm certain that the idea of an elected position for the park board is not completely unreasonable, and I know that might shock people to say that, but listen, when people are elected, they get the mandate of the people saying, this is what we want. We have decided that we are going to elect people who share our values. And when we are not elected, it necessarily makes it harder as a board to say, we are representing the views of the people. We are representing the views of our council members, hopefully, and the people who message us and send us emails and show up at meetings. So I'm curious of reactions of where we are in terms of our governance and how we relate to other boards. And anyway,
I'd have to push back a little bit, because I think the challenge with the park board for us has been, and I haven't been on as long as Troy, but I feel like since I've joined, it was always about putting out fires, and the two fires were clap and what do we do with clap, and what do we do with golf and pickleball, lighting pickleball courts, right?
That's what
Yeah, that was, once I joined, that became a thing. But I bring that up because Troy has told us repeatedly that when we've asked him several times, what do you want from us? And it's always been back to vision and policy. And so I don't think for us the focus should be on how do we get appointed to this position, right? Like, we're here, it's our responsibility to do something with it, right? I think our focus should be on how do we cast a bigger vision for what parks can be and help execute a plan, because it isn't, like, I talk to my council member all the time,
Mhm.
right? I don't know how many people talk to theirs or talk to the city managers, but I'll be honest with you guys, like, I communicate with Bob when I see him, and I let him know what my concerns are, and what I want to see accomplished in my district and what I want to see in parks. And from our end as a park board, like, I don't know that that's something that occurs. But we also have to be willing to cast a big vision for what it is that we want to see in our parks. Like, that's amazing. We're building the Pickleplex, right? How many more times though can we do that repeatedly as a park board? Like, can we build other spaces? Like, we're never going to be Tulsa. Like, we have billionaires, sure, but they're not like their billionaires. They're not like Kaiser, right?
Yeah, it's not gonna endow it.
Yeah, our billionaires aren't gonna, and you know what? I'm not gonna say it. But the thing is like, if we had to pick one project, right? If we could be the best at one thing as a park board, like, I hope that we can determine that today instead of pointing to the things that we're not doing well. To just figure out, like, what's the one thing we can carry out?
Sure.
Like, if we're carrying out the CLAP master plan, that's already happening, right? Pickleplex is on its way. What's the next thing, right?
Sure.
And then from there, it's pick the next priority, right? And then we'll put out the little fires as they come up and help Troy advocate for better staffing and more funding. But like, in the budgeting process, like, that's where we need to step up and have direct conversations with our council members and the city manager and let them know these are the priorities. And I know you want to allocate so much money to economic development, but you know what else is economic development? Having livable spaces. Like, Tulsa's being recognized as an economic development hub, but they also invested $500 million into their parks department. Now, that was obviously mostly billionaires, but could we make a commitment as a community? You know, like, those are the types of things that I'm saying. Like, we can change the way we function, or we can change the way we impact our parks department, and not necessarily worry about, like, getting elected or doing other things.
I agree, 'cause I mean, that's how it is on a private board. I mean, the president runs the business
Right,
day to day.
exactly.
And the board gives him vision and direction and gives feedback and says, this is what, I don't agree, or I do agree, but why don't you think of this instead? That's how the relationship works and functions.
But we advocate, right?
Right, we
The-
advocate,
The
yes.
board's advocates, and they tap into their networks,
Right.
and they use their expertise. Like, y'all are experts in your own right. Like, everybody here has a different level of expertise in a different area, right? Now, can we flex that and help Troy and the park department, like, build the next, like, what's next after the Pickleplex, right? Like, what's the next big, amazing project that puts us on the map?
That's what I disagreed about his article, was that, okay, great, that worked in 1990. It's not 1990, it's 2022.
Right.
And whatever may have worked then, or 1980, great, it worked then, but it's not then, it's now. And so this seems to be working. And so do we want to mess with a formula that doesn't need to be mixed or changed? So then we wouldn't have the same relationship with Troy we do. And I think that's important.
So if I could just jump in on two things. The gathering place, what you're talking about over at Tulsa.
Right.
Just so you can put this in context, $450 million. $200 million was donated by their local billionaire. $200 million was donated by conglomerate of businesses.
Billionaires.
And actually, I'm sorry, it was 465. 65 million came from the city. And part of that is an endowment for them to continue to have good maintenance and whatnot. So, but kind of what, I just wanted to put that out there. But in regards to the makeup of the park board, and so as you all know, the park board actually used to be an independent government agency here in the city, and they actually collected taxes. And this was before my time, so I still don't know all the history. I was trying to find some history and read some things. There's not a whole bunch out there. I think the park board was financially strapped, was not having the same success that it used to have. There was overlapping duties and responsibilities with the city. So, and the YMCA was coming on strong. So a lot of folks said, you know what, the YMCA, why don't we just let them do all the recreation? The Parks and Recreation Department just maintain what they're doing with parks. And that's how the Board of Park Commissioners dissolved and became a part of the city's Parks and Recreation department. All over the country, there's park districts, there's recreation districts, there's parks and recreation districts that operate that way. Down in Derby, we have the Derby Rec Commission. My wife works there. They collect taxes, they collect revenues from all their activities. The city pays them to do certain services as well. So all of those revenue streams provides them an opportunity to operate and provide recreational activities throughout Derby. And they only do recreation, they don't do parks. The City of Derby has its own Parks and Recreation Department inside Public Works. That's just one example. There's many, many different examples, and especially in Illinois, there's a lot of park and recreation districts. And some are really successful. Some are not. And it really depends on what the community is looking for and what they want and what their priorities are. So being part of the city gives me a lot of opportunities to work with the other departments. I get resources, IT resources, accounting resources, the whole 9 yards to help me operate and do the things I need to do. So there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat, but this model became this model for a reason, and a lot of it is simply because there was a resistance to duplication of services. Duplication of services with the Park District and with the YMCA, and that was a long time ago, and things changed, just as you mentioned. But I was just giving you some history and some context to where we're at.
Thank you very much, Troy. I really appreciate that explanation. And Alejo, I certainly appreciate your pushback. But you spoke kind of to how the spirit of what I was hoping to speak to in terms of governance. It's simply that what are the needs of our time? We had needs in 1990 that, according to the board at that time, required that action. And I think that, I've recently read, what is it, tradition is peer pressure from the dead. So listen, yes, it's been the tradition since 1990 that this is what we've done. But what are the needs of the city now? What are the needs of the city in the future, moving forward, the good old days yet to come? So that's the thing. I don't think that there should be any question or any suggestion that's too risque or taboo to say that perhaps we could do things better. So I'm just simply interested in what are the alternatives. We don't have to have the discussion today. It's just I know when I hear Troy say, man, for 6 years we've been banging our head against the wall, I say, okay, can we possibly find another way? I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if governance is the way. I don't have confidence that advocating our city council people in the manner that we do now is going to result in different outcomes than we've had for the last X number of years. So that's my frustration. And it's not to say that I think that this way is better. Like, I just don't know. I just don't know what I don't know. And perhaps there's a golden answer out there, but that's really my explanation on that. So does anybody have any, I guess I wanted to make certain I opened up the floor one last time because I'm trying to keep mindful of the time. Does anybody have any thoughts of our current state, of things that need to be raised right now? Anything that you'd really like to bring up that's on your chest to say? Okay.
I'll
please,
hop
Eddie.
in here, sorry. Alejo, you brought up, some really good points, and you were involved in the first go-around on this, and I've talked about it for several years now. The Riverfront Legacy Master Plan.
Yep.
Obviously, that's come and gone. We spent a lot of money on that as a community, not just the city. When we look forward, the governor's race just ended. I listened to all the candidates speak about how important talent attraction and retention is. I think Kansas and Wichita falls in this, obviously. Is one of the biggest migrated out of states for young people.
Mm-hmm.
I was just in Kansas City this weekend, and it's kind of sad to see how many high school buddies I have up there that just wanted to get out of Wichita simply because they wanted to go somewhere else. So when we talk about what's that next big project, and we look at the issues that are presented from our electeds, I think, talent attraction and retention is important. How do we do that? how can we tap into that from a park board with our electeds, both at the city council level and our friends over at the commission. You know, the Riverfront Legacy Master Plan 3 years ago, COVID happened. It is what it is. How do we are there conversations happening? Who do we need to tap into? Who's going to spearhead this? Because frankly, I think the convention center, if it's put in the ground tomorrow, which I think it should be because it makes financial sense, we're going to see 3 to 5 years. It's going to take 3 to 5 years for us to truly benefit as a city off of those finances, because it takes 3 to 5 years to recruit those conventions to our town. Now, I think there's a way to do it where Century 2 remains operational and we keep all of our existing conventions. We can go off-site with Convention Center. We can go off-site with Performing Arts Center. I think it's too much of a hot topic right now. What do we do with Century 2? Is there an opportunity for a park of some sort? I think it was brought up in the old plan that there is some aspect, a community centrally located, huge park. Tulsa is a great example, gathering place. Is there a way to tap into some financial mechanisms, much like the bed tax or TIFs or CIDs, from the park perspective to kind of bolster our operational revenue stream? And who do we need to talk to make that happen?
All right, so a couple things. Operational and capital streams are two different things. And there's different ways of managing and collecting and spending that money. It seems to be a whole lot easier to find capital dollars, put capital dollars into place. But the ongoing operational dollars has always been one of those difficult things. In a lot of downtowns across the country, they have districts where they'll have improvement districts, and there's extra taxes that are collected to help maintain and make improvements. Well, not necessarily improvements, but more maintenance. When I was in San Antonio, when I was the downtown operations manager for downtown, all of our parking revenues went to operate our downtown parks and to make capital improvements to those parks as well. So I think that's kind of what you're talking about, is finding mechanisms to, and it's not just about the capital things, it's the things that go in for long-term maintenance. And so there's a lot of different mechanisms to do that, but it takes some really bold and big bicep guns to make that happen. And people really need to get behind it if that's something they're going to do. And just the idea of making change sometimes is really a difficult thing. So having those conversations is always a difficult conversation because it's going to be changes. And people need to realize that we can't just always stay the way we are. If you want to have that vision, if you want to move forward. So it's just about getting the right people in the right place, and that's probably our electeds, both here with the city and with the county. Definitely the development community needs to get involved with that. And that vision needs to come from the community. That vision from the community is what really drives all these changes. I also want to mention something. You mentioned our talent leaving, and that's one of the biggest issues that I've seen. But I do have to say that the Parks and Recreation Department does a good job. We brought Jesse from Washington, D.C. Tim, he came here from Colorado. He left Colorado to come here. Gentry still is within the city, working within the city of Wichita area, but we kept her here as her first job. She was a young person that had just had many, many opportunities, but we were able to keep her here. Matt Townsend, he left to be a city manager, but he came back to the city of Wichita. So,
no way was that directed to the park staff. You're not saying you're running people off by any means.
But my point on all this is that I've been lucky. I think I've gone out and found, Reggie, I brought him from Texas.
Brought you from Texas?
I'm sorry?
Didn't we bring you from Texas too?
Yes, you brought me from Texas as well, yes.
Young talent.
Young talent. He was young.
Not many kids.
I was
We
young.
aged him.
I was young 8 years ago, but this job, let me tell you.
Clap aged him.
But my point is I make that a priority. I make that something that I want to keep these folks from Wichita here or bring people here to Wichita. And that has to be just as much of an important topic as anything else. So just wanted to mention that.
Well,
Please, go ahead.
I was
No.
gonna say, I want to touch on what I said earlier about funding is a thing. But to Eddie's comment, if you look at what we have been able to do with the money that Troy's been given to do, I mean, look at our pools. You know, we've done some amazing, or I should say, not we, but Troy has done some amazing things with the pools and the money and the splash pads. And, you know, it was, let's go put 4 or 5 pools in. Then it was like, well, what about this year or that or this year? So he's like, okay, let's put some splash pads. I mean, so I say funding, we have grand visions. Usually only can do this much.
Yes.
But that helps retain talent, exactly what Eddie's talking about. And I think, you know, for the park board that we have and the budget that we have, we do a pretty dang good job. All part, I mean, I feel like it's all part of us, you know, help driving that bus, but it's still funding. We're still short a lot of money.
Very much agree. And I want to make certain before I should have said this from the very top. At any point of this discussion, I hope it's very clear, especially to the staff, that from my perspective, and I know the people I've talked to, that the staff here does tremendous work for the resources they do not have. So thank you very much for all the work that you've done, and it shows. The hard work that the staff does, just to go, you know, really, that is a real jewel of this department, is that I know that this staff is so hardworking and so committed to this city, and it's really a beautiful thing to see. I am really excited to hear Eddie bring this up about downtown. It's something that I think for many younger Wichitans especially has been a point of extreme frustration, simply because there's been almost an just intentional sand throwing in the gearbox of like, we're just never going to get anything done, more or less. But I have always felt that the solution for that quagmire could potentially run through the park department, because that land, and I think that as we talk about, you know, moving away from where are we to where we want to be, I think the way that we solve that, the way that we address some of these issues with Riverfront, is to look at our public lands and to look at our park lands especially as things that are not just nice to have. It's not just nice to have a park. It's not just nice to have a downtown place or a public space to go. It's a quite simply requirement to compete. If we want to compete with these other cities, we simply must be viewing these places. And perhaps the real challenge is, how do we change the public perception that not only are these parks that we have, this is not a place where you just go and play pickleball or hopefully reserve an inflatable. It's not just that, but it also is, if you walk on parkland and you breathe air on parkland, you are living in parkland. This is not just a land asset, it's a human habitat. How is it that we can remind people and help encourage the thought that these places are sacred and that we are guardians of that temple, that we must be very much defending every acre that we have, because it's that kind of investment that I think, if people can look at these assets as what they are, investments in the quality of life of Wichita, the money will more easily be appropriated. And I don't know how we get there, but I would very much like to have the discussion with the stakeholders around the riverfront, because if there is an underutilized opportunity in Wichita, it's our river. I mean, it's a beautiful thing, and everyone knows how deeply important water is to the quality of a community. And water access and land access around water is incredibly important. So I know Visit Wichita was deeply invested in this, and that's probably a partner we want to bring on board. I think that if the park board can solicit questions and suggestions from people, possibly through a survey or through town halls or what, I don't know.
We're like the most surveyed city in America.
Sure, but
like if you Google Wichita
Most
survey
studied,
rivers,
yeah.
I'm sure that there's like the information is there. Like at this point, like what we need, like I know we want to gather people's feedback, but like we at some point need to just decide to act.
Mhm.
Like, if you look at, like, I used to work at the chamber. There used to be this thing called Visioneering Wichita, and it was basically like a community vision casting thing that existed in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And when we were going through Project Wichita, when we were going through the Riverfront Legacy Master Plan, like, I went back and I looked at surveys from like 1998, 2001, 2002, like early 2000s, and the feedback hasn't changed. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying we don't survey people, but I'm saying at some point, like, we just got to decide to act. And do we bring stakeholders in? Of course, bring them in and bring in the community and bring them all in and be a part of this process. But like, we have to decide, like, look, the question on the table, if we're gonna build a park in downtown on the river, it's, do we wanna blow up the circle or not? You know what I'm saying?
I want to make one thing clear real quick. You know, in no way am I saying we should go out and turn every single park into NASCAR Park per se. But I think this urban, like, kind of core center of our city should be a really cool, almost like a front door to Wichita when people come in to visit for conventions or performing arts or what have you. So in no way am I saying we should, you know, revitalize all the parks, but I think that would be a really good way in the core of the city to kind of invigorate some positive.
Yeah, I mean, really, where my mind goes with this is I think about Millennium Park in
Chicago.
In Chicago, I mean, like, it's really these marquee and we have this land that is park land that, you know, how can we make a truly, like, if you are first impressions of Wichita, what do you want to say about the city? Like, what is it that we want to say as a city? Could Parkland do that? Could we deliver that message through parks? I think yes. And so I'm very curious I mean, is that a mission we want to take on? Because if people are saying, where is this thing? Let's do it.
Well, it does it right now with the Keeper of the Plains. That's parkland, and that's right here on the cover. Anybody and everybody who talks about Wichita, I often bring folks from out of town and take them to the Keeper, and they just go crazy. And that's the impact of parks, and that happens in every city. I've been to big cities and small cities. Billings, Montana, they have a great downtown, but it's anchored by the park. New York City has a great park, Central Park. So every one of these cities has something that anchors it park-wise.
So, I mean, I think really, skipping ahead to an action step, I mean, this is something that I'm Eddie has gotten me motivated on this, because I think you're right. And you know what, Alejo, you're absolutely right. We have studied the hell out of this thing. I think we know, like, let's just move and at least put a proposal forward. So, I mean, I don't know if we have to take a vote on it, but that would be an action step. I would say if we want to put something up on the board that says what's an action step, let's put together a proposal to make Century Park, or whatever we want to call it. You know, I mean, let's create a marquee park for downtown Wichita.
I mean,
there's a RFP that went out a couple months ago, if I'm not mistaken, about the old former library.
Yeah.
Right there on that piece of ground, and I don't know what came of that, but I don't know if we need to go an RFP route. Who puts that out? Is it Bob? Is it, you know, our new assistant city manager came from Omaha and kind of led them through that entire process. So maybe it's somebody up there. Maybe it needs to be pushed forward, though, because people are like, where is this thing gone? You know,
You're so right. I mean, it really, I hear it from a lot of people. Like, I've had many discussions just privately. People are asking, is this still moving? Well,
it hasn't moved. I mean, the plan is there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's steps that need to be taken. Like, if that's something that.
Well, I definitely am interested in taking on that conversation, because I think it can lower the temperature, hopefully, around a lot of this.
Let me go first really quick. And I think part of the reason why that plan was Century 2 was part of that whole thing. Now the question is it parkland, which is outdoor space, or is it something that includes Century 2? So I think that's something you might want to distinguish.
Well, I mean, I think it'd be foolish to plan a district without planning for the public assets that exist there already. I mean, you're going to have to, like, for example, in my pipe dreams around Century Park, let's just call it Century Park, I imagine a place where, for Riverfest, you've got an amphitheater south of Century 2, that there'd be a place where people could literally gather in a giant space outdoors that's not on Douglas. It's in a park. You see that in public parks. Like, where would be if you wanted to have a big speaker come to town, like at a big amphitheater, we don't really have one. I mean, what is the big gathering space in Wichita? To me, it makes sense to put it somewhere like that. And then, yeah, it should include the environs. It should include the library assets, and it should include access to Century 2, because, you know, how is it that people are going to interact with those spaces?
The newest gathering space, National Park. We're supposed to do
Sure.
all that, but in a much smaller.
Yeah, it's a small guy. You know, you need to have,
Some area,
yeah. So somebody, I mean, like, if you're going to have, let's say, you know, a big, I don't know who the kids are showing up for these days, but like a big, Taylor Swift comes to Wichita.
Eddie's showing up.
She does love Kansas. So let's say she comes, like that kind of venue. I think that's the kind of vision, I think. And imagine you have the library right there that could be used as there's a
Pre-function space of some
yeah,
sort.
there's a venue.
Yeah,
It's a
the
beautiful
library
space.
stays
Like, and it's a
away.
gorgeous building,
Yeah,
really.
that library's going away, dude.
Is it really?
Yeah, if you build a central gathering place, there's no footprint. At least from what I remember with the plans, there was no footprint where the library stayed, where you had a park there.
I mean, listen,
Building needs to come down. I was on the park board, or on the library board for that whole discussion. I was the one that took all the city officials through the library to show them why this was not a good place to expand, all the challenges that came along with that product. I mean, the library, it served its purpose. It's time to become parkland or
Yeah.
wasteland.
And if we're gonna do it, like, here's the thing, like, do it right. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I don't know what the action item is, but if we're gonna own it, like, let's just own.
Well, I want to just say, so I think we're talking about two different things.
Sure.
We're talking about riverfront, or the river
Master
corridor where River Vista is and all that, right? Or you talk about riverfront stadium. That's two different pieces.
Stadium?
The stadium.
No.
the east bank of the river.
No, the riverfront
That's what I'm
master
saying.
plan.
So you have the east bank of
Yeah.
what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But we also have the riverfront stadium that, this is an asset that is supposed to be being developed already. Per the agreement of the stadium and the baseball team
There are
coming.
two major distinctions between the east and the west.
I understand that, but if this development happens, not from Parkland, not from our budget, then the rest of that
The
development
West Bank.
happens too. The West Bank happens.
I'm
Because
just
the,
saying the West Bank is privately owned. The
agreed.
East Bank
Bank is
is city of
public.
Wichita.
I agree, but I'm just saying it's two pieces
Yeah,
of the
but we
puzzle.
weren't, I guess I wasn't talking, I guess I didn't think we were talking about the West Bank.
Well, I was just trying, that's what I was trying to get deciphered.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think there's,
Riverfront or riverfront?
And I think that there's a,
not Riverfront Stadium. No,
There's a way to
Riverfront
make
master
both-
plan.
Make sure we
Yeah.
decipher that.
I think there's a way to make both sides of the river shake hands around public land.
I think they're building a bridge.
Yeah, yes, very good. So, it sounds like this is something this board would like to take on. I mean, would Philip, Tom, do you guys have any kind of thoughts on the matter? Is this something that rises to the level of something you'd like to discuss moving forward? Because, I mean, I could say from my perspective, it does.
So,
Oh,
I have some staff members that
oh,
have
They want to
some
blow it up?
please.
information.
You can sit over here. We've got a microphone. Hey, where's the hand mic?
Here we are.
There's a
No, we're
mic,
good right
there's a
here.
mic. We got
Or just
mic.
join us.
You're not.
All right, you're not Lucia.
He wasn't gonna say that.
Something I didn't want.
I kind of want to tag on to what Eddie was talking about
Let's
with
hear
the
it.
Riverfront Master Plan. And I think one of the things that bothers me about what happened is, and you said it, Chris, is we hit COVID and the thing just blew up. It just sort of just petered out. It died, you know. The whole nation was under this crisis. World was. And so I kind of wonder, downtown Wichita is obviously a catalyst for downtown Wichita development. And I think they were kind of behind the scenes. Obviously, they're the liaison with the business community. They were talking with a lot of the stakeholders that helped fund that. There was a lot of money spent in the private sector. Helton City helped with that too. And it just seemed like there was never any finalization or executive summary, or it never came to a,
It was received and filed. I
it was
believe, in a
received and
joint-
filed,
yeah.
and I think we should challenge that.
Yeah, yeah. I agree.
And do we go to Jeff and Jason and bring it up? And I feel like there's a sense in my mind, and maybe this is whether it's true or not, I wonder with the business community, that might be a big chance, and they're probably feeling like, dang, we really stepped forward, and now this thing has failed, and that wasn't necessarily their fault because of COVID. But maybe the park commission and the park department could start that conversation again, Chris. And I think you're onto something, Eddie. I think we've got Nafsker Park. Chester I. Lewis is coming on board. We're not done with our work yet, but we've got some momentum. Some of the great cities in America, like Portland, they created a downtown park master plan, a framework plan for parks. And it was only just about the riverfront, which I think the riverfront is probably the most important thing, right? But why should we just forget that plan? I mean, let's revisit. There was a lot of work that was done by a lot of important people in this community, and I think you would get some good vibes back. There's going to be the bad vibes. There's going to be the negative Century 2 people, but you got to fight the fight.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, the master plan that was presented and received and filed and all of that, it's far from perfect. You know, I think it was 1.2 billion worth to be spent. There was a perfectly good parking garage that was set to come down and then double that. But it was there was a lot of concern on my part from a funding standpoint,
Sure.
And how they were going to get the funding. I think there are avenues to get the convention center in place without having to raise taxes. I think we can, on the performing arts side, I think we can raise a significant amount of private capital and put, Chris Pompelli's name on the side of that thing. But there are ways to do it without increasing taxes. So I think that plan was far from perfect, but it does set a precedent to get the ball rolling again.
I think so, and I would just encourage this board to think about that, because I think if you approach Jeff and Jason, and I'm sure Troy's had those conversations already, but yeah, I know politically it's kind of a tough time, but we're coming out of it. I mean, I don't know, I think we are. But we got to keep going. It's like you said, how many studies do we have to have? When I first came to Wichita from Aspen, Colorado, I was hoping that, this is my hometown, that something great would happen on the river.
And frankly, if we just kind of let this thing die, it'd be yet again like we had all these fantastic ideas, and like how many times in Wichita's history have we had all these wonderful intentions that just
I'm pretty sure if you go back to the record, I've said we're kicking the can down the road at least 100 times in 6 years.
It goes back to the 70s.
So-
I can find master plans in my
Well,
own.
the original
yeah,
city
it's-
plan, they pulled up the original city plan and the process, and the original city plans had a beautiful
had a
downtown.
beautiful park plan.
Yeah.
It was
and it's
the
literally in
Bartholomew
that-
plan. You're
Yeah.
right. Tim.
Yeah, so, thank you. Just a couple things. Would like to point out that city council is they would require a public vote before doing something with Century 2. So just wanted to remind you all that will also go to the public. So I think one other thing is the ownership of the land is, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure A. Price Woodard and a lot of other land downtown is the city's. It's not the park board of commissioners.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
I think talking with the elected officials and things like that, to Alejo's point, would pay a lot of dividends in the future, and setting the seed and doing all that now and advocating, using your weight and continually talking to them would pay a lot of dividends, because you really need help to do it. You can make and scream and do all that stuff as loud as you want, until building relationships, as Larry mentioned, and I believe Eddie mentioned too, working with the businesses down there is probably the first step in making sure everyone gets on board. I mean, it's amazing what you can do with just a few people in a room to, get conversations going and say, we think that this is time. And I think as a park board, I think that if you craft or, a vote or something, not now, but, craft a message or a stance or something like that that you have, that makes it easier for people to say, yeah, I agree with them, or I agree with them, I support them and whatever. So I think that in terms of getting out front and maybe being the front of the boat can help, but you need the rest of the boat to go forward. So just a couple thoughts.
All right, completely agree. That kind of goes back to my RFP question. On your Century 2 point, you're exactly right. We can't touch that thing without a referendum. But there is some opportunity that we can get a convention center in place without having to touch that and keeping Century 2 fully operational while the construction is being taken place. And then performing arts, I mean, when we talk about the cohesion between the East and the West Bank, I think the performing arts community and the development team over there at the Metropolitan Baptist Church would love an anchor tenant of the new Wichita Performing Arts Center that overlooks the river. And at that point, we can, the bridge can talk to the East and the West. And
Is that in the offing? I mean, I didn't know. Is that like the direction that is open to pursuit? I mean, like that. Frankly,
I think, in my opinion, and take that for what it's worth, that's probably the way to go.
I mean, the location would be tremendous. I mean, just from as a Wichita resident, and frankly, it also cements Delano as the entertainment portion. Frankly, that's like you go to the west side for the entertainment, the east side's the natural convention center, hotel. So
The problem is you're talking about taking the biggest tenant out of Century 2 that we just gave $16 million to spend to, I'm not sure do what, to
Deferred
Century 2,
maintenance.
but gonna take a lot more than 16 million in the deferred maintenance.
That's over a course of 5 years.
Exactly.
So,
But you're taking the biggest tenant in the performing arts out of Century 2, if you're talking about moving them across the river.
but they would still be operational during the construction.
Agreed, I'm just saying, I mean, there has to be a bigger conversation about Century 2 if you move it.
You have a better idea for the use of Century 2?
Blow it up.
I would love to hear it.
That's it.
Uh,
that's the
I'm
best
all for it.
use.
Well,
You're gonna get rid of it.
I think there's first of all, I think
Third of it.
there's many uses. I mean, and I think to say that there's no uses for a building such as Century 2, there's creative uses for any building, and
Financially sustainable.
Not financially sustainable.
well, if it's a city asset, I mean, like, listen, are we looking at? Is City Hall financially sustainable?
No,
in
but
that
like,
case?
but
I mean,
you-
like, this is a city asset that we're talking about.
But you build a building that's meant to be accessible to people, and you can only use a third of it, and we pay, I don't know, but when the Riverfront Legacy Master Plan came out, I think it showed, I think we paid like 2.7 million just to turn the lights on, but we can only use a third of the building, like, you know what I'm saying? And then
Well,
the other thing with it too, though, and what I'll say about the Riverfront Legacy Master Plan is that, and my biggest knock on it, because look, I'm all about blow up the building, let's build a big, beautiful park in downtown. The challenge with the way it was being executed, and this was something that I always brought up to them in their meetings, was that it's presented from a lens of economic development. But if you ask somebody from the south side or from northeast Wichita or the north side what economic development means to them, they could care less about economic development.
Right.
If this is something that we're gonna build and build out as a community, it needs to be accessible to people, and people need to be able to understand what it is that we're gonna do. And like, look, I am down to champion and stand in front of people and talk about, let's build a big, beautiful park in downtown, surrounded by a convention center, a new performing arts center on the river that people can access. Let's do it, but we need to make it digestible for people. And
Has anybody had a conversation with the Save Century 2 group about maybe a potential open air park of some sort, or is it strictly like off limits, do not touch?
it's off limits to
It is
that.
off limits.
Yeah.
They don't want you to touch that building in any
No,
form.
well, they want it, it's
Except for they
a
want
historic
16.
building now, so any changes that have to be made to it has to match like the way it was preserved at the time. And it's silly for the city because instead of being able to update it, we literally cannot update it. It has to stay like that historically
No, I'm
accurate.
right there
It's
with
the
you,
dumbest
Leo.
thing.
I'm just trying
It's
to
so
throw out-
frustrating, that's what's
Yeah.
frustrating, it's not a park thing, and it's not our time to talk about it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
So
what
I
I'm
mean,
frustrated.
yeah, it's a clearly a hot button issue that we will work our way through.
Just needs one hot button
And
to
ju-
explode.
and unlike other
We need
meetings,
a
we will not
millionaire.
let this consume all of the meeting. So okay.
What do we want to get done?
Yeah, I'm very eager, though, to continue this discussion about. I think this is a worthy topic, and I really am glad that you brought it up because I know it's on a lot of people's mind, and we're not going to solve it today. Obviously, if we could, that would be a thing, though, wouldn't it?
Well, maybe the action item is we go talk to the downtown development group, Jason and
100%.
Jeff over there, and see what we can do for.
Because that's already there. I
The
mean, it's
plan's
already
there.
We just have to.
How can we
revive
write
it.
it? How can it be made right? If we've got issues with it, how is it that we at least present a plan, like something
I
that's
don't
like
think
this?
you make it right. I think you have to start the conversation first.
Yeah.
Sure,
Once the conversation starts, then we figure out what's right. It
correct.
has to be brought back to the surface. People are still licking their wounds from 2020.
Right.
We're paying a lot higher gas prices. We're paying more for materials, so we're still kind of licking our wounds. So you don't want to go in full force. We're ready to start. You know, it's not going to fire up like that.
Well, it's, like
But we gotta start
NASCAR,
it.
NASCAR, Troy and
People
I,
hated
we
it.
got through, the design and stuff of it. Every master plan that you see, it's never built out 100% of what it's gonna be. It's
That's just what
vision.
we'd love to see.
So to your point, the bridge, the performing arts looking over the river, there's other elements that maybe doesn't make sense. It just doesn't work or whatever. But it could be tweaked or it could be revised. It might even be a pretty major revision, but at least it's a starting point. And there was a lot of research and good information. A lot of money spent. So let's not just throw that away. It might be quite a bit different than what it looks, but maybe we can make it a lot better.
For sure.
And do something that works for, the vision of the city.
Okay, so I'm looking at, I want to make certain we're out of here at 5 o'clock, so that gives about 12 minutes left before we talk more action items specifically. A couple of other things I know I wanted to bring up, I'm going to go down a punch list and we can stop. And maybe this is like just talking about an overall master plan of, do we need to commission another master plan for the park department for the next 10, 5, 1, like listen, so it looks like our guys are saying, yes, we need to commission one. Okay, so
It's been a while.
it's been since 1996?
2008, I think.
Excuse me,
it was.
I didn't see actually, it
We
was not in
did
the
a little
library when I
update,
went.
but it was just a miniature version of the old one, so.
Okay, so perhaps that might be a good point of discussion. We want to have a master plan.
So, yes, so many things have, I talked about this, I think, in the last park board meeting. So many things have changed the past 4 years. Funding has changed, the usage of our parks, how people use our parks changed, the expectation of what our parks should look like and operate. Not to mention on the recreation side of things. We got parks as far as, think about parks with all the infrastructure, but recreation-wise, there's a whole slew of things that need to happen as well. Now, I talked a little bit about duplication of services with the YMCA, and that's always been one of the things that we really need to sit down and kind of figure out, what is the YMCA doing? What are we doing? Even what are some of the other private providers are doing, what the school district is doing. And so for me, a master plan is not just about what Parks and Recreation is doing, but more of a citywide plan of what and how things are being used. We have a lot of different resources. Am I not too loud? Okay. So there's a lot of different resources out there that we're not using to its fullest potential, but there's a lot of things that we haven't taken care of either. And that's one of the big issues is all the deferred maintenance that's happening. Century 2 is a perfect example of that. It could have been, or could be still a great asset if it was maintained the way it's supposed to be maintained. Now, I think a lot of things that, I'm using Century 2 still as an example, a lot of things have changed that we can't use Century 2 for anymore, or things have been modified differently. The old library is a good example of that. Running all the conduit and all the connections that you need for computers, you can't do it in the old library. So that's the kind of same thing with our parks, but even more so with our recreation centers. We're getting $10 million for, I was going to say McAdams. I'm sorry?
Brewer?
For Brewer Recreation Center. Okay, I couldn't hear you. That's what
Sorry, I was trying to talk in the microphone.
Yes, Brewer Recreation Center. We have 6, 7 other recreation centers that need a huge facelift. But then we go back to that question. What's the YMCA doing? Are we duplicating? Are we adding to it? Do we need more indoor soccer? Do we need more climbing walls? Do we need more fitness weight room areas? I don't know. Those are all really big things to ask in regards to a master plan. So not only is it the park stuff, and Larry is very good and nods very much yes in regards to a master plan for parks, but it's also the recreational aspects of things as well. Education, health and wellness, all those things that are wrapped into parks and recreation.
All right, totally agree. So I think maybe, would it be appropriate to just discuss the elements that we would like to see in a master plan? Because there are some things that I know, in my view, have not historically been addressed that I would hope could be addressed. And I, like I said, I'll just kind of go down a punch list. If anybody wants to stop and say, explain more or whichever. I just got a few things that, the first and most important to me has been the hobby horse of mine since day one, and that's water access. That is, setting standards for our parkland and our the lands under our control, the buildings under our control for water access, drinking water, bathroom access for our residents. What are the standards that we are going to say that if we have a park of a certain size and we want people to be there of a certain amount of time, it ought to have a bathroom, and we will budget this for development of new parks and of revitalizing old parks should have that. So that's number one. Along with that, it is water access. You were saying, what do we duplicate with the Y? One thing that the Y does not do is it doesn't provide public access. It's a membership organization, and they turn people away often. I've got people in my life that say they don't go to the Y for that reason. And so consequently, and I know this has been a point of discussion in the past, we do not have a public swimming facility in Wichita. We do not have a natatorium. And other communities do. There has been discussion about Goddard having that, but it sounds like that may have fallen apart. So we do not have a public access swimming facility in Wichita. Likewise, and this is a matter of personal dignity, we do not have public baths in Wichita. And that might sound a little bit out of left field, but I believe that that goes along with water access, that folks don't necessarily have the resources themselves, and they need to find a place to get safely clean. I think that's something that definitely goes along with viewing our parkland as a habitat. Lucia had mentioned to me once, and this is something I think in a master plan that we have, and Tom, you mentioned it too when we discussed this last, dog park facilities. What do those look like currently, and where would we like to be?
I'll stop there.
Please, go ahead.
We have lots of dog parks.
Sure.
All over the city,
Mm-hmm.
even downtown. So we have lots of dog parks.
Right. I know in my discussions with Lucia, for example, she was saying down in Southwest Wichita, that's something that in her district she's found are less accessible. So it's just a question of maybe a survey of matters of access. Like, does every district feel that they're getting the kind of levels of access that, I live in College Hill, and I have the privilege of being 3 blocks from a park. Frankly, I don't think that should be a privilege. I think that if we can make it so that more places in Wichita have the ability to have a walkable park within a walking distance of them, like I was talking to Penny, that she lives in a place that is just not walkable, and that's a development choice. That's saying, when we are apportioning new land to be developed, we're not saying that we recommend that you put a neighborhood park in the middle of that, because right now, the outskirts of town don't have hardly any new parks planned. And I was looking at one of our 1990s master plans that called for 3 new parks on the eastern edge of Sedgwick County. And it was a wonderful report, wonderful master plan that nobody acted on. And here we are. So perhaps other communities look at setting acreage per capita numbers, and that was another piece of the master plan that Wichita currently, according to the last one, had 11 acres per capita. You look at places like Austin, I think it's something like 29, if I'm not mistaken, just a vastly larger amounts of land that are just dedicated, and that's the pre-planning. the development has already been planned in Wichita. We know what the future development's going to look like. What does our park development look like in tandem with that? How can we make recommendations that as we are developing, we recommend that you put a pocket park here. We recommend a neighborhood park here. We recommend a major park here, say. So I'll shut up here shortly. But the last piece of that I'd like to bring up, of course, trees would be a part of this. How do we include the tree policy, and how is it that we can encourage private buy-in to the tree policy as well? I think could go in a master plan quite well. Finally, and this is Alejo, I talked to you about this, specifically in District 1, in areas that have suffered in one way or another from economic distress or lack of economic development. How is it that we can leverage our public assets, including our parklands that are not necessarily being developed, in a way that we provide a framework for access for economic development? What am I talking about when I say that? Alejo and I had been throwing around an idea that turns out is not a new idea. I told you, I was looking at this. There's a plan for the canal route. It's in the library right now. It's the coolest thing. Where when they built 135, in addition to the extremely detrimental consequences of the building of a highway through a neighborhood can have, it tears up a neighborhood, there was some idea of trying to mitigate for some of that to help make it a more accessible place. And you see that now. Basically, it's a pretty dusty overpass with some walking paths and a few lights. But as a matter of fact, there was a plan in place in the 70s to make it a parkland under there. So expanding our footprint in unique ways. How is it that we can take asset, like who else is going to look at under 135 as a development opportunity? I mean, it's city land already. And if we have neighbors who are not getting the equity in terms of parkland and again, issues of economic development, we can create that in this huge space right in the middle of Wichita. And I don't want to harp too much on that canal idea. I just think it was a neat one. But that was a piece that if we can, I would hope that parkland, park assets, can, much in the same way, we contracted with Wave, and Wave was able to make private dollars on public land. How is it that we can say to the people of Wichita, if you want to sell something in our parks, we would love to be able to help you have an entry to the market that's easier? Because if we're going to have a better city, I want to see people live well. That includes being able to be economically successful. And if we can leverage our park assets to do that, much in the way that we do with our food trucks, how can we expand upon those programs to create some more economic growth opportunities in some of these historically underserved neighborhoods? So I will shut up, and if anybody else has any thoughts on, if you want to talk about a master plan issue, what are some of the things that we could be talking about?
One of the things, I'll just jump in real quick, I won't spend much time, is land acquisition. Where our developers just keep eating at land on the fringes of the east and west sides of the city. And so it's maybe not a popular subject because we always come back to we need to take care of what we have, but it's about land banking areas that we see value in, whether it be social, economic, environmental, that have value before the developers get to it. And land is cheap in Kansas, but it's not always going to be that way, and it's not that way now. I mean, it's gone up a lot just in the last 10 years. So getting ahead of the curve, as you said, that those maps that show the big circles, okay, we need to have a big regional park here. We need to have someone out hawking, and it's just been a tough deal for Troy and staff because we used to have a line item in our CIP for land acquisition, and that line item has gone away, and it's because we have, which is good, we've always had this thing about we got to take care of what we have before we get new stuff, but you cannot put a price on land. Right. I mean, it's just whether or not you use it, but it's a tough deal and it's a tough balance.
Yeah, without that land acquisition opportunity, there's no vision.
Right.
Because you're stopped, it's boxed. You mentioned some of these past master plans. You also mentioned a couple other things in regards to park development and access to park. Those are all great items to have in a master plan. But to support all that, and one of the reasons why some of these things don't happen is because there's no maintenance dollars. And that's always one of the biggest things when we talked about National Park is a good example, is, yeah, we're gonna do something great with National Park, but how are we gonna maintain it? So fortunately, we do have some different funding aspects for that, to do some light maintenance or changes and upgrades, but David and his crew, they have to absorb some of these costs when we do all these additions. Take care of what we have, because if not, then as we're adding things, everything else is deteriorating. So definitely, I mean, you have to have that vision, you have to have that gusto to go big or go home and do some great things for all those reasons, whether it's economic impact, because parks do economic impact, quality of life, keeping people here, all those things. All has to kind of mesh it together. So I will mention one thing. I think I shared with you guys that we were doing a pilot program with Playcore on usage of our parks. And the way they're doing that is they're recording cell phone activity in the parks. And one that came last week, well, just before Thanksgiving, was really interesting, Harrison Park. And Harrison Park, we put the dog park in there. And if I remember right, we had roughly around 50, 60,000 visits a year before the dog park. After the dog park, 180? Oh, no, what was that? Okay.
It was about double.
It was at least double. Okay, it was at least doubled. I thought it tripled. But anyways, one amenity like that changed that park. And how much did we spend on Harrison Dog Park?
It was about $500,000.
That include the
And
parking lot?
that did not include the parking lot, I think. It was
Okay.
separate. Yeah, the parking lot came out of the Hyatt Fund and some CIP.
Yeah. So I think those were dollars well spent. It was leveraged really well. And then when we do something like that, it adds value to the rest of the park, which adds value to the rest of the neighborhood. So that was just a huge, I knew it, but I didn't know it was that much. It was great to see the numbers. So
I think too, like Pawnee Prairie Park was a good example of, it was very highly contested, controversial, the equestrian community, but the usership on Pawnee Prairie is just, exponentially just gone through the roof ever since we put those trails in. It was, everybody was fighting the bicyclists being in there, and now it seems like things have settled and everybody's like, wow, this is great. So I don't know, there could be some hidden gems out there that just kind of brainstorming what we have that might be opportunities.
part of the
that we
master
don't
plan
know
has to
about.
also be environmental. And I don't have any statistics to show this, but I think because we have more activity at Pawnee Prairie Park, there's probably less wildlife out there. I know it's very much a venue for birding, and this is just a few folks mentioning to me that it's harder for them to find the birds that they used to find before, just because it's a busier place. So you have to kind of measure the good and the bad, and anything that we do in regards to increasing park acreage, adding amenities, what's the environmental impact on that as well. So,
Anybody have any other thoughts about if we were to move forward in commissioning actually, I got a question. If we did commission a master plan, how long is that process? I mean, in your mind, like if we said today, let's go, what's the?
So it probably costs anywhere between $400,000 and $500,000
Okay.
to do a full-blown, address a lot of these issues: health and wellness, environmental issues, land banking, recreational programming, all that kind of stuff. So the process would be gather the funding, would be one item, and however long that takes. Then the next part would actually be to set up the request for proposal. Actually, we'd probably ask for a request for qualifications, narrow it down to 3 or 4 agencies, select one, do the contract. To actually have them do it, it's probably going to take a good year. So if we started January 1, it would take 2 years.
Other thoughts? I mean, I think that, is there any other, even if not about master plan discussions, are there any other things that you say that I wish we could have, wish that we could be about, I wish our values could be lifted up, say? Is there any other things that you'd like to bring up?
I'm just going to bring up one thing, and
Please?
it may be controversial to some degree, but we have what I think would be eventually a destination level regional park, the Crystal Prairie Lake Park. I know we're trying to focus downtown. Even if you can just think of the infrastructure only of getting that lake there and getting the native grasses going and maybe some walking paths. Speaking of water access, I grew up in this community, swam in Wilson Lake. What used to be Crystal Lake was now the moorings. It's all privately owned. No public access to really good, fresh, sandpit water lake. We have a master plan that has been dredged over 15 years now, longer than that has been carved out to a footprint, to a master plan. If you put dollars to those numbers of actually creating a lake, it would be in the millions. Yeah, we extracted a resource from that. We benefited a little bit from that. Of course, the Cornejo, and that was the agreement, but we have the infrastructure of most of that lake dredged out. The only portions that haven't been dredged out is creating the swimming area in the beach and what could be potentially a wake park area. That's one of those economic things. You'd have to have the right partner to do that. Whether or not that would even be feasible, I don't know. But everything else in the lake is pretty much set up. So that was in our CIP at one point in time. It disappeared. We had the stadium that was built. I won't go into all that, but that was very much a disappointment to me personally. But I just don't want you to lose fact that land is already there. It's got great access off the highway. Even if it's 10 years out, I mean, there's some potential there.
Can we,
Even if it's just done at a minimal level, just to get.
maybe that's where we start, is like, what are those projects that have been placed on hold that it's like, we just need to help carry through the finish line? Because like, if we're gonna spend, I don't know, 2 years thinking of a master plan, but we have all of these projects that are gonna be amazing assets to our park system, I mean, maybe we do both, but I mean, if there's things like that, like Crystal Prairie Lake, that we can help.
Well, you got
Bring it to life.
got the Sedgwick County Park area that's always been
Right.
popular. They built the sidewalk or the bike path that's now going to be a connector. In this last 10 years, I get phone calls almost yearly about Jay Russell's community, and I'm not advocating for urban sprawl. That's not my point. But the thing is, it's already happened.
Right.
We already got residential areas that are developing. And we've got people asking, hey, the city was going to do this, and now you don't hear anything. Like, I can't say anything because it's not in our CIP. Troy and I got our hands tied. I'll just say that a little bit because there's not any money in the budget, in the CIP to do it. So even if it's not done to the grand scale, if you can just get the infrastructure built for the lake. And I would also say, it's been a few years back, but we went up to the top of that landfill, and if you look out, I mean, we don't have elevation in Wichita, Kansas. I go to Colorado all the time for elevation, but when you're standing up there on top of that, I think you were around when we did this. Yep. It's impactful. You just look there, it's like, wow, this is really cool.
It's parkland.
It's parkland, and we already own it. We don't have to acquire it. Well, it's city-owned land that's for park purposes. If you go back and read through the park minutes, the park board minutes, Joan Cole has that stated in there. So, just wanted to throw that out there.
I know. I think that goes along with our.
We have all the graphics and beautiful pictures.
I think we've seen them recently, didn't we?
I think an acreage inventory is an interesting discussion to have with that. Like, just what is the land that we had that was originally earmarked for X, say? I don't know how many of those projects we have, but just the pieces that were just kind of left, you know, with the keys still in the ignition, say. Any other thoughts? Any other action steps, action items for today?
I know we want to do a master plan, and I think that that's awesome, but I feel like we should also do some, like, tangible, like, we should help bring some tangible things to life, you know what I'm saying, between now and, if this is something that we do carry out and we're raising $500,000 to carry out a master plan fully, we should also get some other things done beforehand.
Sure, and that's actually a good point, a good reminder that frankly, like the 2023 goals was the last piece that I think that we wanted to really discuss. So I mean, if we were to, as a board, let's just open it up, that'll be the kind of final piece. If you could, in the next year, say we've accomplished goals, what are the goals for 2023 that we can look back a year from today and grade ourselves? Because I think it's always helpful to have a report card, to have metrics to grade against. So I'd say at the top of that list, it sounds like, just from our discussions, was a restart, renewal of the discussion about what to do around downtown Wichita, a marquee park, a destination park for downtown Wichita. I think would be kicking off that discussion would be a great 2023 goal, and helping revitalize that discussion, renew that discussion would be an action item. Are there other action steps you think in the next year need to be raised to the top? Other things that are important to you that you'd like to see happen in the next year? I think maybe finalizing the tree policy, like that would be another one I would say, because that's reasonable as well. We're almost there, if I'm not mistaken. So I'd say getting the public land use tree policy out the door, as a corollary, perhaps a discussion of how to help the public, if the public wants, or if they on private land wants to have guidance and recommendations for tree policy. That could be a discussion to have. That's another thorny discussion that we can have lots of fun meetings about as well.
I think we need to keep the momentum with golf.
Okay.
You know, we've had great conversations. Golf's come a long ways in 7 years. Thank you.
What does that look like? What's the action step?
You know, we're working on doing some clubhouse renovations at MAC, and there's still the first tee program over there that's got some more steps to take. I mean, I think we can't stop on this golf thing. This thing has drug on for so long. We're finally like showing a profit. We're finally, I don't know if we're showing a profit, but we're finally moving forward. And so 2023, we really have to make sure we don't let it die on the vine. And, you know, okay, the courses are running. We're happy. Let's go move on to the next thing. We haven't done the finalized any clubhouse renovations.
So yeah, I think maybe let's kind of have a mini discussion of like, what are the action items within golf? I mean, is that something that we could speak to briefly?
So, Mr. Palmer is actually very correct in regards to that. I think we got a lot of momentum going forward, and thank you COVID for that silver lining, right? And I think the idea that we close CLAP has a huge impact as well, because that really reduced the overhead of all the golf program. So some of the things that we need to do for golf is we need to modernize the equipment, we need to modernize the irrigation system. And I think I've shared this with you guys before. We need water. We need water because we need grass. We need grass to play golf. It's just that basic, and that's what we're really focused on. The other items, the clubhouse, food and beverage, getting new golf carts, all those things are supporting items to really enjoy your golf experience, but also make more money. So Jesse's going to be putting together a golf plan, and hopefully we can get that done February or March, and that would be one of the things that would bring the park board. Cool. Okay. The other thing, you know, Tom really got me thinking. One of the goals that I want to do, thanks to Tom and his comment, is how can we reduce our greenhouse emissions as a department? And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we might be able to look at, and maybe it's not that easy. But what is the path that would take us somewhere, and how can that take us there? So that's one of my goals that I'd like to see.
They promote it to the public to say, we're leading on this.
I think it's appropriate, and I might get in trouble for saying this. I always get in trouble all the time. But in regards to this area of the environment, I think the Parks and Recreation Department should take the lead. And I think we take the lead on a lot of different things. So,
You know, to that point, Troy, I was hoping Tom would speak up, but we went to that tree little conference, and there's a lot of plantable area. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but it was really remarkable, that report that you have, Chris. I implore you to really look at that. That could really help, just the idea of just more tree canopy. But I know it's an uphill battle, and it's, but it is one way to really impact our environment from an emissions perspective. I mean, even just, I think you're talking more about motor vehicle stuff, but still it's,
just in the realm of sustainability.
yeah.
One that I wanted to bring up that actually, I don't know if it's a year goal, so I don't know if it's appropriate for this, but this is something that I wish I'd brought up earlier was, we talk about like river access. I think one thing that has been a concern, not only of mine, but of just many people, is that the river is not healthy to engage with. And what are the steps that we can take? It is not impossible to clean a river. So are there action steps that we can take?
Expensive.
Yeah, it may be expensive, but I mean, like, what are there long-term? And again, maybe this is a 20-year thing. That it's less expensive over if you make it over a long-term solution, rather than just a single investment. I mean, this is the fact that we can't swim in our river safely is embarrassing. And I mean, like, yeah, it's a city, yeah, but you can't touch it. You're not supposed to touch it, and that's not good, because if humans can't touch it, then neither should animals, and it's just all bad. Like, it's all bad. And so, please, can we do something about that? As if we're going to be a leader on environmental issues, it'd be really good if we could touch our river.
You can touch it, just don't drink it.
Yeah, well, Troy, your response.
My response. It's going to need a coordinated effort, because a lot of this is upstream.
Yes.
It's not the doing or the work that we do. But I think just the same situation with the trees. We want to be a good steward of trees. We want to be a leader on trying to get more trees in the ground. So what can we do from our perspective to protect the water that's going downstream? And I think we're doing that. Our water department does great work in the water that they do put out is fantastic, and so it's something that I'm not very familiar with. I don't know the details. I'm just kind of telling you kind of on a bigger scale of things. It's not just what we can do here, but a lot of it is upriver, and I think that would be a little bit in the state realm that we really need to talk to our state leaders to help us with that.
Chris, it was it's award-winning plan. Lenexa, city of Lenexa did a stream bank buffering plan for the entire city.
Mm-hmm.
And to Troy's point, he's exactly on point. We get a lot of, unfortunately, we're an agricultural state. Not unfortunately, fortunately, but unfortunately, because of that, we get a lot of runoff from agriculture, and that's a tough deal. But I think, even in Cheney, we have the RAPS program where we've taken and allocated large pieces of land around that water body to help filter the runoff before it gets to the actual. So it's a huge undertaking, but if you're looking long range, you might look at that Lenexa, do a Google on Lenexa. It's a bigger deal than Wichita, because it is a lot of that stuff, I think. It's Wichita too, but we're getting a lot of contamination from the agricultural communities north of us, between us and Hutch.
Contamination from agriculture and from development,
And development
past
too.
development. We had some unhealthy
You're talking about Midtown, basically.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
like
stuff
Midtown is it's not a super fund, I guess. It's just barely not a super
Well,
fund. But
in northwest Wichita, I mean, come down the river corridor, there was some factories and stuff like that that are still polluting that water, you know, and that's gonna take 100 years for that to stop. Or we go in like they did in, Blackwell, Oklahoma, when they took out all the dirt, brought in new dirt. I
yeah,
don't think we're doing that.
probably not.
Because Blackwell, Oklahoma did that.
Well, Gilbert Mosley is all the underground water.
Yeah.
Remediating that.
Right. Here's one that I just, and we'll wrap it up here very shortly. But the other piece that I think is very important, and this is the last thing that I will say, is that if we are going to change a mindset around parks, or if we want to emphasize a mindset, I would hope that we could emphasize the community and bringing community together in an intentional way. And I wanted to throw this out and just get the park board's reaction. It was an idea of community integration. What does community integration mean? We have 6 different districts, and oftentimes I've heard this described about Wichita as we're less of a city more than a patchwork of communities. And frankly, there's a lot of people who don't go west of Rock Road, and that's just their experience of Wichita, and that's fine. But I think it's an interesting idea to say, how is it that we can leverage our park system and our recreation to intentionally, much in the same way Riverfest is a place where people can come together and celebrate, how can we have a park or recreation festival that would bring all 6 districts together to utilize our parklands on the same day, for example, to maybe have a park cleanup in your neighborhood on the same day, or a competition across the city that all 6 districts, we have a tug of war across that river. Like, that's the motivation to clean it. We can have a tug of war across the river to say that all 6 districts are going to compete to do one thing or another, to clean the river together on this day, and then we're all going to have a big party down there. Or say we're going to have a cleanup at this one particular park. We were in Riverside Park one day, Tom. I saw you, and you were pointing to this giant overgrown piece of, it's just imagine we were discussing having an army of people come in and volunteer to clean that up on one day. And then afterwards, let's put down our tools and, have a big party, maybe a big sweaty endeavor on a Saturday, but then you got everybody all there together, experiencing this work together, and recognizing this is a shared place. This is not just a place where your tax money goes, it's where you go to live. And so it's on all of us to keep these places up. So that was just one thing to throw out and as a possible suggestion.
We do those things. Those things happen. And you ask what we can do as a park board.
Sure.
We as a park board need to do a better job of sharing that information.
Yeah.
Because we have river cleanups all the time. We have festivals. We have open streets. We have the 4th of July party that the city puts on. We have those events.
Sure.
But I watch the park stuff go out, and I don't see a lot of us, myself included, commenting, sharing that information. She does a great job putting the information out. But it's on us. If you want to be a big part of the park board and you want to be a big part of the city, use your social media platform to push it. Use yours and mine. You know what I'm saying? We're not good at that. And if we were all good at that, these things would be a lot better. Because there are a lot of things. They do a lot of things. Exactly what you're saying. They do a lot of things, but no one knows about it.
I think that's a great action item that I think if we can all commit to, like, in 2023, when Katie's putting out something, that share everything, just go nuts. I think that's an excellent use of time, and as a responsibility, just promote it on LinkedIn, promote it on Nextdoor, promote it on Facebook.
I mean, my 50 followers, I share with them.
Yeah. No, I think that's an excellent, that's a responsibility of being on the board. You got to promote the work that we do and that good stuff. So I think that's great. So do we have any other closing thoughts? Anything that's not been said yet? Any other questions or concerns?
I would just say that I would encourage everybody to think about, if you could do something in your district, like if there is a project or a thing that, you think should be resolved, or you think we can resolve in 2023, if we all brought something to the table, we could knock out 6 projects, right? And hang our hat on 6 amazing things that occurred. And I would encourage people to think about that because we all are facing different challenges in our districts that, might not be important to the other person because maybe it doesn't impact us directly and we're just not aware of it. And so, I don't know, I keep coming back to like, think about the tangible things because like, we're talking about really big picture stuff, but to the community, like, they could care less about a plan that's 3, 4, 10, 20 years down the line. They're thinking more about
What can you do tomorrow?
what can you do tomorrow? Like my playground got burnt, right? That bridge that I used to walk on, I can't do anymore. I can't walk anymore, right? Or whatever. So I would say, to us, let's think about one thing that we could do in each of our respective districts. And maybe we bring that to the table and that's what we start tackling. In addition to the other stuff, right? Like there's things that have to happen simultaneously.
So I think that's good maybe for our next meeting, if there's anything else that we want to clean up, like anything that's not been raised, like other items that can be done, like put on the agenda before Jan 1. And if we really want to make that our 2023, I totally agree.
So I think the Parks Foundation might be a great
Yeah.
conversation. They
I
would
know.
participate
They stopped emailing me.
in,
Okay.
I
I mean,
You what? Yeah, I haven't got an email from them since.
oh yeah, we're a little late. Yeah, it's a little late in the meeting, but I would love to have more conversation about Park
I was just
Foundation.
saying Parks
Yeah, yeah.
Foundation being able to fund
Yeah,
some of those.
definitely.
those
And they're
endeavors
looking
in
for
each
those
one.
things.
Exactly.
Like they funded wood benches
Yes.
because they didn't know
So
what
that's-
else to fund.
That is a great. That's excellent. Like items that the Park Foundation like trash, receptacles. Do we have enough of those? Like that'd be a great use of.
I'm not even thinking about trash. I'm thinking like what are enhancements? Cause like
Park enhancement.
right, cause like the trash cans and stuff. You put out new trash cans, the community like
So
they're
it's got to empty them.
right. The community's not gonna say, "Oh, amazing! We've got 10 new trash cans." They want to see like, "Oh, awesome! Like we got a new playground that's accessible to all kids, right?" Or we got a new dog park that
They
you know
want
what I'm
walking
saying?
paths.
That's exactly no,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. Like
13 people wanted one.
The
But
people
think about those
have
things,
the people
right?
have spoken.
No.
The 13 people have spoken. Okay.
They also said we need more bike paths.
That's true. Okay, all
We
right.
just don't
and-
love bikes, man.
Okay,
I know.
folks, with that, I think we're running up against time here, and I know that we got to be out right at 5. So, again, for myself, I want to say to my fellow board members, it really does mean a lot to have you guys come here on your Tuesday to share your thoughts, and really your work here does make Wichita better. And the same goes doubly for the staff. Thank you very much for all your hard work. And Lucia, did you have a question?
No questions. I'm good.
Okay, excellent. Okay, well, with that, I'm gonna say, go ahead, let's adjourn our meeting today. Thank you so much for watching along at home, for those who watched along, and again, thank you, staff. Everybody make sure you get validated, and let's have a safe ride home.